Okay, we're gonna have a blast. There we go. Korach. Vayikach Korach, says Rashi. Korach shepikeach hayab. Korach was very, very wise. Now, the word pikeach actually means sighted also. Sighted, like pokeach ivrim, like as opposed to blind. So Korach can see. So he sees things clearly. So Mara al shtut zeh, how did he get caught up in this stupidity? Shtus. That's Rashi's language. Ella eno hitato. His eye misled him. So this is all surrounding vision. Ra'a shalsheles gedula. He saw a shalshelet of gedula, of greatness, a chain of great people. Sheyotzet mimenu. He saw that Shmuel Hanavi was going to be his descendant. Shmuel is described as great as Moshe plus Aaron. Moshe Aaron b'chonav u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. So he's Zera Anashim. He's as great as these two great men. So he's fighting with Moshe because I'm greater than Moshe and Aaron combined, based on my eventual progeny Shmuel, and he saw that was his mistake. So it's a sefer called Roshei Besamim, Vishaya Muscat. It's published 150 years ago in Warsaw. He was a Rav in Prague. Okay, so this is what he says. I found a few other people say this later. The Yalkut HaGershuni brings this from someone, but this I think is the first place where this is suggested, something very creative. He says, listen, there's a Gemara in Yuma, which we're going to look at because it's super interesting, which says, Ein mimanin parnas al hatzibur. There's a halacha that you're not supposed to appoint a parnas, a person in a position of leadership over the community, ela imkein kupa shel shratzim teluya lo me'achorav, unless he has a basket of creepy crawler animals hanging above his head or just behind him. In other words, what it really means is unless they have skeletons in their closet. And the way Rashi says, clearly from the context, it means dofi mishpacha. There's something in their family that's not all that impressive. So people that come from impeccable lineage, just the holiest people, so they can't be leaders. Now, Moshe had a problem because his mother and father were aunt and nephew. Yocheved had married her nephew. That's clear from the Torah. Before the giving of the Torah, for Goyim, that's acceptable. After the giving of the Torah, that would be a problem. And so it kind of looks bad if you dig into Moshe Rabbeinu. Why was he born from this? Now, the truth is, you'll notice all the great leaders of the Jewish people have really fishy situations when you look into their mother's family. That's very consistent. David HaMelech, and like you see all these funny situations of looking into the family. And the Gemara goes into that. So this story goes that there's no Dofi Mishpacha in Korach. Korach goes right back, Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahas, Ben Lev. He's great. And he's a great man. He's carrying the Aron. And we know that the people in the tribe of Levi had much more deaths, it says in the wilderness, because the Aron was killing people. Because if you weren't worthy, so he was worthy. So Korach started out, and he has Ruach HaKodesh. He knows Shmuel is coming from him. So this is a serious personality. Korach then says, right, there's no Dofi Mishpacha in my family, and I could prove it that this is right, because look at Shmuel. Shmuel's one of the great leaders, even greater than Moshe and Aaron, and they don't have any nonsense in their family, any bad lineage. What is Shmuel's Dofi Mishpacha, by the way? It's Korach, right? That's what he didn't count on, is that he himself was the curse in the history of Shmuel that allowed him to become great. So Korach actually facilitates it. Isn't that something else? But that's Korach. So what is this Dofi Mishpacha business? Why is that a necessary thing in order to be a proper leader? Why do you have to have this story? I want to also point out that the Talmud Yerushalmi says Korach came to Moshe with all kinds of complaints and questions. And one of the things he said to him is a talit shekulat tchelet, a talis that's made entirely out of tchelet. So it's that sky blue dye that you're supposed to put only on one thread on each corner. So what if the whole thing is made out of tcheles? The entire talis is all tcheles. I don't know. So it's hard to know exactly what he was asking. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I'm not sure. But I guess if you have something that's fully made of tcheles, you still need to put one string on the corner of tcheles. And it's very clear that when you talk about a talit shekulat tchelet in modern contemporary Hebrew, that means a super righteous, perfect person. It's either used sincerely or it's like, oh, that guy thinks he's talit shekulat tchelet. But whatever it means, a talit shekulat tchelet is a totally righteous, perfect person with no dofi, right? With no spot. That's not tchelet, which is a spiritual color, which the Mishkan was always, everything was very, there was a lot of tcheles in the Mishkan. Rav Hirsch writes that tchelet comes from the word tachlit, which is the end, because in Hebrew, the colors are done a little differently than in English. We say there are 7. They used to say 7 in the rainbow, and then they started with 8, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Then red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But you know that this is a spectrum. There's an infinite number of colors in there. So what's the smallest number you can use to still kind of get across the colors? So the Torah uses 3. The Torah has Adom, which is red and orange. It has Yarok, which is green and yellow. Many times Yarak is the color of gold, right? A very yellow. And then you have Techeles, not Kachol, Techeles, which is, it means the end of the spectrum, the Tachlis, like the end. And you therefore find that's blue and violet, right? Blue and purple, and that's the end of the spectrum. So the ocean is tcheles because it's the end, it's the gateway to all new vistas, and the sky is, and therefore spiritual things are always imagined as being associated with tcheles because they're that side of the spectrum. And then adom hazeh, like the physical, bloodthirsty, right? Esav, who just wants to eat beans. So like that's the red at the other end. And that's why there's sources to say avoid redheads and the whole thing, because and you can find more about that in the book Paradise in chapter 1. Very first chapter is that redheads aren't entirely bad, and you can find some of the redeeming factors in David HaMelech and so forth. So check that out, the Timsa Nachas. Shameless plug for the free book. Okay, so it says about Korach in the Rashi, Eino Hita, so his eye, right? And we know that tcheles on the tzitzis, what's the purpose of putting that on? When you see it, it will remind you visually of all the mitzvahs. That's the purpose of the tzitzis. And the tcheles reminds you of the ocean, which reminds you of the sky, which reminds you of God's throne. So it's vision. And if you do that, v'lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei nechem, you won't follow your lave and your eyes. Our sages tell us following your heart and following, right, v'achar einechem, following your heart is sexual immorality. So next time someone tells you follow your heart, right, don't listen to them. It's not real. And I want to spend a second just explaining, because that's what everyone says. That's the best piece of advice I have for my children. They should follow either their heart or their gut. I mean, I don't know if either one of those is more elegant to say. I'm going to trust my gut. Why would you do that? And einechem is minut, is false ideologies, avodah zara. So we'll get to that too, because that's really what Korach's mistake was, denying Moshe, which is one of the 13 principles. Because he wound up on the other side of God on this issue. It wasn't just that he followed his desires. So the lave, what's a lave? So it's worth understanding this, that the heart represents human emotion, and human emotion is extremely malleable. The heart's a muscle. If I play the right music and we put the right story behind it, and we can make you cry about anything. And so that's going to happen. I mean, if it hasn't happened yet, it will happen soon, that someone's going to make a movie about like a brother and a sister who were separate at birth and raised in different places and fell in love with each other, and all they want to do is be married. And anyway, she's had a hysterectomy. Nothing's going to be weird about the kids, right? Or whatever the story that they have is, right? One's a geneticist, they figured out, and yet everybody's mean to them and doesn't want the brother and sister to get married and says, ew, that's yucky, and look at this prejudice. And all it really would take is like cast someone with moo cow eyes, right? And the whole thing. And emotionally, we can be manipulated into anything. Don't follow your heart, says the Torah. I mean, it's a very tricky thing. This is what people are doing. We have, down the streets of Los Angeles, there will be parades, and for the whole alphabet. I mean, right? It keeps going. Like it's better to just say the whole alphabet. You can get sued if you don't say the whole thing. But and you have a conversation. I want you to understand something. There used to be avodah zarah, people marching down streets, worshiping idols, and you think, what are these people insane? Like you read Tanakh, like the Jews on Har HaKarmel. But nowadays, you can go to people and say, okay, wait, I just don't. Just help me understand the logic here. So you were born a man but you were really a woman. Yes. Okay, so when you were a little boy, you were really a little girl. Yeah, why? Did you like girls' toys? No, that's all made up. Okay. Were you attracted to little boys as you hit puberty? No, that's orientation. That's not connected. Okay. Um, did you like all the girls, like shopping and princesses? No, that's all made up. That's completely made up by society. Okay. Did you want to have different genitalia? No, it doesn't matter what your genitalia are. So what is the difference between a man? Like these really basic questions. So you ask one or two questions and you say, okay, wait. So do I have to believe in souls? Like, what are you telling me? Is this a like? And the person tells you, I can't stand this hate, and they storm away from you. And there's yet to be a person born who can answer that series of questions. So they make a movie out of it, right? What is a woman, right? With a Matt Walt, like just going to people and saying, like, hey, listen, serious question. Like, what do you mean? And they laugh and they move, they shift around uncomfortably in their chairs, and they tell you that you're ignorant. But so how do we not believe in Avodah Zarah? The answer is Avodah Zarah plays on emotions. Emotionally, I can completely relate to everyone marching in that parade. I totally get it. Somebody's sad, somebody's hurt. What do you care? Stop thinking so much. Just be nice. I get it. But intellectually, it's completely devoid. So follow your heart is extremely dangerous because it'll take you anywhere. It'll take you right off a cliff if necessary. So v'lo sasur achrei levav chachem. Don't follow your heart and don't follow your eyes. And what is your eyes? So the way the Rambam says it is that a person has to be careful how they allow their thoughts. You have to make a gavul with the way that you think. Think intelligently. Don't just allow your thoughts to run wild. You're not supposed to be sitting there thinking about anti-God thoughts and other such things because eventually they can lead you in the wrong direction. And that itself is a very important thing. To be properly able to regulate the way that you think. If you would like to be a more positive person in life, like that's a lot to do with how you train yourself to think. And it's not appropriate to just follow your ein haseichel anywhere, right? In other words, even if that leads a person, be conscious. Use this as a tool towards your higher and more lofty goals. So Korach, Eino Hitato, he had a problem with vision, and he didn't have. Listen to this now. I told you that every good leader has to have some sort of skeleton in their closet. So what's that about? So let's just show you what the Gemara says. Ben Shana Shaul b'malcho. King Shaul was 1 year old, is the way the pasuk reads, when he was king. When he took over, he was 1 year old. So clearly that's not what the truth of his age was. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna, Keben Shana, King Saul, father-in-law of King David, he was Keben Shana. He was like a 1 year old, similar to a 1 year old. Shalot ta'am chet. He never tasted the taste of sin. This was an extremely righteous and holy man. This was a man of perfection from the tribe of Binyamin. Binyamin is one of the four who never sinned. This is a very righteous and almost perfect person. Maskif lo Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was sitting there when this was taught, and Rav Huna explained that being a 1 year old means free of any sin, because what bad did a 1 year old ever do, right? So he says, Ema keben shana shemeluchlach betit v'tzoah. Maybe he's like a 1 year old who's filthy from playing in the mud and tar, right? In other words, 1 year olds they crawl in the dirt, and tzoah is feces. Maybe it's a 1 year old with a filthy diaper that he just rubbed all over himself. Why would you say that Shaul? Why do you interpret it this way? So that's a physical description, according to this. In other words, he's asking, who says, how do you know to interpret it this way? So here's what happened to him. He had terrifying dreams. And he realized, so he woke up from his dream, and he said, Ne'eneti lachem, I have spoken ill against you. I apologize. Atzmot Shaul ben Kish. He said, the bones, to the bones, the dead, corpse of Shaul ben Kish, please forgive me. I spoke negatively against you. He went back to sleep. And he had again terrifying dreams. So Amar Ne'enesi lachem atzmot Shaul ben Kish melech Israel. So he asked forgiveness, Shaul ben Kish, who you were a true king over the Jewish people, and please forgive me. And that was his, that was accepted. So I think it's one of the Rishonim anyway. Maybe the Radvaz, maybe the Reb Shlomo, maybe Marshal. I don't remember now. But one of the Rishonim says that if a person needs to ask forgiveness from a person who has died, you see from this Gemara that there's no need to go to their grave. So you see from here that he was asking forgiveness. He really felt bad for what he said. It was so unacceptable. So we should all be careful. I remember once, my father-in-law is a holy rabbi. He was He's generally extremely patient with people asking off the wall, boneheaded questions. Really, like unusually so. The one time that I saw him get like visibly like shaken by a question is when somebody was telling him that Shaul was a terrible king. Look at the psukim. He read something. He said, "What a terrible man," and he was like almost turned white. He said he was the Bechir Hashem. He was the choice. Like he's one of our heroes. Like we still name our children. Like he was a great man. Like he had his area of imperfection, but it was great. And this person kept pushing, and he just like he said to the person like, "You should not talk like that. Don't say that." Like it was very out of character. But now I know it's a Gemara. You see, it's a Gemara that says that this is a very bad idea. One of the rabbis of the Gemara made the mistake. But since then, no Jew should have made a mistake because once we have this, it's part of Torah. Then, so that was the first teaching. Next thing in the Gemara, Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel, another teaching. Mipnei ma lo nimshacha malchut Beit Shaul. Why did Shaul's kingdom not last? Mipnei shalahaya bo shum dofi, because he had no nonsense. He didn't have any dofi. That was what we started with. To Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Shemei Tzadok Ein Ma'amidin, because Rabbi Yochanan taught. There's a famous teaching that you're not allowed to, from Rabbi Shimon ben Yehel Tzadok, that we don't appoint a parnas on the community unless he has his kupa shel shratzim hanging over him. Why? It says a little more. It says a reason. She'im tazuach da'ato alav. That way, if that person who's in leadership becomes, full of himself, right? He feels, look at me, right? I'm all that and a bag of chips as well. So they say, Chazor la'achrecha, look behind you for a second and you'll see where you come from. You see? So in other words, a leader has to have a human side, and he has to have things in his family that he's not so proud of either. And therefore, he won't look down on other people and be arrogant. So you see from here that the biggest challenge is that you have to be humble when you're a leader. But you have to know that in order to be a successful leader, you also have to be confident, and you have to be willing to fight wars. And if you're a king, you're not allowed to forgive your honor. The Gemara goes on to say, Shaul was punished. Amar Yehuda, Amar Rav. The next Gemara, Mipnei man ne'enas Shaul, Mipnei shamachal al kivodo, because he forgave his honor. He was humble. When you're too humble and the people come and say, no, we don't want to listen to God exactly, we want to do it this way, we want to do it that way, you can let yourself get pushed around. Because, okay, who am I? I should yell at people. I should tell people what to do. I mean, that's not a king. Melech shamachal al kivodo, a king who forgives his honor. Ein kvodo machul. It doesn't work. It doesn't get forgiven. So if a king tells you, don't bother, sit in my seat, you can call me by my name, you do those things, you'll get killed anyway. He's not allowed to forgive it. It's not his to forgive. The Jewish people have an obligation. You have to make him a king. And making someone a king means that even if he says, I don't need it so badly, you still treat him with that respect. So a king has to be powerful and strong and can't go around forgiving things. But Shaul was humble. So it's interesting. In other words, it's almost as though he didn't need the Kupa Shel Shratzim to keep him humble. He was humble. His son, Yonatan ben Shaul, we saw Gemara recently that he was one of the 3 humblest people ever to live. The Gemara says in Pehei in Bava Metzia that Yonatan ben Shaul was one of the most humble people ever. So in this family, humility is a tremendous trait. So that's very important. But the problem is you have to have the confidence too. So Shaul's missing the Kupa Shel Shratzim. He's not perfect. So I found a few interesting sources that are very interesting.
I did not understand the connection with Shratzim.
Kupa Shel Shratzim. Do you understand that? Are you familiar with the English expression "a skeleton in the closet"? You ever hear that expression? Okay. I wish I knew it in Italian. A person who has shratzim are creepy crawler animals, worms, and so this is an expression. It's an expression that means right. So in this case, it would be that the family dofi mishpacha, that there's story. David HaMelech, it's kind of an embarrassing story. The whole way that his family came from, with his own mother, their stories, and their stories with Ruth is a funny story, and that's what it means. It means the person who has a skeleton in the closet, the person who has secrets that they've hidden away. So that's the simple way to read this Gemara. So, and by the way, I saw that. Okay, you know what? There's a remez here. What does it mean that this was kiben shana. He was like a 1-year-old who had never tasted sin. So what do we mean that he never tasted sin? Just say that he never sinned. So the answer is that he was extremely sincere. Shaul turned to the prophet Shmuel and said, I fulfilled the word of God. And that just wasn't true. He hadn't. He had left the animals alive. But he really thought he did. He was like a Ben Shana. He was like an oblivious, like a little baby who just doesn't understand that he just did something wrong when he broke half the, half the things in the house. And you can't really yell at him. He's very sweet. So that's the first thing. So then he sees him in a dream. And he says to him, I insulted you, the atzamot of Shaul ben Kish. The atzamot. When he insulted him, said maybe he was dirty. Maybe he really did mean. He knew he was filthy. He knew he was dirty, right? Don't tell me he was like a baby who'd never sinned. So he had his terrifying dreams, and in the end, so why did he apologize to Shaul ben Kish? And why did he mention the bones? So there's a Gemara that says that there's three partners in a person. Three partners in the person. There's God, Father, and the Mother. The Father gives a person the whiteness, and that's their bones. The Mother gives the redness, and that's the blood. And I have no idea what this means medically, and I don't know. And there's a whole question of, can you decide paternity based on a blood test? And I saw that some posts can say, no, blood will only tell you who the mother is because of that Gemara. Isn't that funny? I'm like, but what about the science? No, that's what they say. It's older svarim, but it's very, very interesting thing. Like that Gemara says the red. I don't think it's meant to be. I think Shlomo Zalman already says, don't take that too seriously as a literal statement. It's a metaphor, whatever. It's true, but whatever it means. And Hashem gives the soul. So the atzamot, the bones, the white, comes from the Father. And he was basically saying, like, Shaul, I was essentially insulting your family. I was insulting your parentage because we're saying that you're completely righteous, as your father was. There's no Dofi, right? And the truth is there was no Dofi, and that was the problem. The problem was that he was so righteous. Someone who was so perfect and so righteous wasn't suited for leadership.
But what would Dofi add in Shaul's case if he already had the humility?
Humility, right? So here's some thoughts. We have a couple more sources, from the good sources. Listen to this. Rabbi Yitzchak Eliyahu Landau. This is a very important one. I think this is maybe one of the best sources when it comes to education and outreach and just being able to like deal with other people. It is not. It is not. That's Rabbi Cheskel. Rabbi Yitzchak Eliyahu Landau was the Rav in Vilna. I think he might have been the last Rav because like once the Vilna Gaon came along, but he was an important writer on Agada and all kinds of other things. So this is what it says here. When a person becomes a leader, they generally are not hungry. The leader has food, has gold, has what he needs, and therefore, when the tzibur has an inyan shu meshukatz u'ma'us lefi tchunato, or b'vo'elav he's ish nagua. So imagine a king, and a person comes to him who's unpleasant to look at. I mean, part of being a rabbi is like seeing some of the dark side of things. You hear about things that happen in the community, right? I mean, people call you up and they tell you like things you don't want to hear. You ever heard of such a thing? And it's like, oh my gosh, now what? And it's like, oh, can you talk to the person? Oh, I don't want to be connected to this with a 10-foot pole, but that's the job. I mean, and not only that, you have to not judge the person too harshly. You have to help them out of whatever they sink into. That's an unbelievably difficult thing. So, Sorchlo, a person needs him, and ein menichol iskar velov. Therefore, you shouldn't appoint anybody who can't handle it. Welcome. The person has to be a savlon. He has to be patient enough. Loseis al kasefo me'achar of kupa shel shratzim. This person has to realize that you're not so perfect yourself either. You've also struggled in life. You're so perfect? I mean, you never made a mistake. You're not. So this is a big one. In other words, it's so easy to look down on another person and say, I would never do that. You're disgusting. You're horrible. It's very easy to do that. Um, you never reach anybody by doing that. That's not leadership. Leadership is realizing you have your own things. It's a very healthy thing that you have parts of your personality or your behavior that you would feel if anyone else would know about that right now. If somebody would just announce all this, Eliana would come and just like say, I'm picking you and we're hypnotizing you and you're going to announce everything to the crowd, that would be horrible. That would be humiliating. That's a healthy thing. Now, it can't overtake you, but you have to have that because then you can relate to another person. I mean, otherwise, what hope is there? So that's what he said. He said, in fact, um, there's a pasuk that we say every day, Remes v'tzipor kanaf, malchei eretz v'chol ha'ubim. So the pasuk starts talking about creepy crawlers, and then it goes into kings, malchei eretz. So he says that's why, because to be a good king, you have to be comfortable with your own kupa shel shratzim that's hanging over you. Some of the greatest rabbis of the Gemara, there are stories about them doing very, very embarrassing things, or almost doing very embarrassing things, and catching themselves. The great Rabbi Amram Chasida has this amazing story where this very attractive woman was in basically the house above him, and it wasn't yichud because it would take 10 men to move the ladder, but in a burst of adrenaline normally reserved for mothers whose children are trapped under an SUV, he managed to move this ladder over and then started climbing up the ladder, and he was going to sin with this woman. I don't know if she was in on it or not. That's not clear. No, it could be that he was going to be chased. I picture almost, I don't know if you remember the old Pirates of the Caribbean days where there was a man going around, right, chasing this woman. Come here, wench. It's like going around in a circle like for 100 years. So that's so that's almost the picture. But on the way up the steps, he yelled out, "There's a fire in the house! Fire in the house!" Now this is again Reb Amram Chasida. That means Reb Amram the righteous. Of the rabbis of the Gemara, many of whom could revive the dead. He was considered a chassid. He was he was unbelievable. And so all the other people in the neighborhood, the bucket brigade comes in with the whistles, and the hats. Woo! Where's the fire? And they like his suspenders have off running up the stairs, and say, "Rabbi, you've humiliated us," said the other rabbis. And he said, "I don't mind. It's worth being humiliated in this world and not the next world." And he goes down as a hero in the Gemara, that he had a Yetzer Hara and he managed to control himself. We don't pretend that he was, some sort of Christian saint who doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. We don't say that about our Rebbes or our Tzaddikim. We say what makes them great is that maybe they did have moments where the Yetzer was very strong and they overcame it by announcing it. And that's not something to be embarrassed about. So if a person doesn't have a Kupa Shel Shratz, if a person doesn't have a Yetzer Hara, they can't be an effective leader if they haven't struggled at things in their life. Okay, so that's a big one. Let's see a little bit more. Let's see a little bit more. There was another couple things on this, and then I want to jump to like a sort of a part two. Rav Dessler. Rav Dessler writes like this in the Michtav Eliyahu: Ha'adam shemechabdim oto. I think it was, but a person a person who is respected by others, who gets real respect, is liable to start believing that he's actually really great. But it's a big mistake, because the fact that somebody gets external respect doesn't necessarily have any indication of what's really on the inside, and therefore a person needs to keep in mind the Kupa Shel Shratzim. A person has to really keep in mind their weakness. And he says, he has even a suggestion. He says the fact that a person starts to feel good when somebody gives them kavod is such a silly arrogance that itself, an enlightened person can feel pathetic just by that. Say, what a pathetic person I am. And someone goes, "Oh, Rabbi, you're so wonderful," and like, yeah, okay, I'm pretty. I know I am, like, and this person's telling me these things. So he says the problem is that people are so silly that even when you know it's completely fake, and even when you know it's not, we still like it. It still feels good. The person is just kissing up to you and they're just saying what they want to hear, and people can't get enough of it. So it's a big risk. Now, there's a second thing here that maybe we'll tie the two together. I don't feel like we have to, but I feel like I can't skip the next subject. The children of Korach, after all of this, after Korach, not really seeing things for what they were, and be too carried away with his own arrogance. The Kubishal Shratzim didn't allow him to see himself for who he really was. Um, right? He didn't have a Kubishal Shratzim, but he provided one for his descendant. So he didn't have that skeleton in his closet, right? So listen to this. Rashi says, in the story of Korach, all the people died and their families and their children, little babies. They all died. Come and see how difficult, how horrible machlokas is. Based in Shalmata, Beit Din here only punishes people after Bar Bat Mitzvah. Based in Shalmala, in heaven, they don't punish until the person is 20 years old. Whatever that means. That's understood that your brain isn't fully developed yet until you're 20, and you're not quite held responsible in the same way as you might be for things based in Shalmata. V'kan avdu avyon keshadayim, and here nursing babies were killed. That's Rashi. And the question is, how is that fair? What is the message? Says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. Let me just get to the right part of the page. Sorry. So he says that there's a concept in the Torah called the Ben Sorur Umora, a different concept of a child who exhibits such devastatingly wicked behavior, even before Bar Mitzvah, that if a child meets all of those signs, which has never happened, it's never happened, and it will never happen, the Gemara says, but if it would happen, you would put that child to death even before Bar Mitzvah. And the Gemara says, why? And it says, because this child is definitely going to grow up and kill people. He's going to hijack people at the crossroads, Milastim and Sabrios. He's going to grow up to be an armed robber. And therefore, better that he should die now than go on to be so destructive in life. Okay, so that's not our subject. But what you see from here is that sometimes a person could die, Hashem could cause death in advance because it's certain that something very, very destructive is going to come from this. Now, there's a Ramban. In the end of the Torah, it says, Pen yesh bachem shoresh pore rosh ula'ana. Maybe there's a person in the Jewish people who has a rotten shoresh, a rotten root. So what does that mean? Shoresh ra etzel ha'av. If a person has a rotten root from their family, from their father, yifre beyiske, it will grow, or yifrach beyiske, it says here, yifre, it'll grow and it will tower. Bad fruit comes from this. A person who comes from something rotten, the father's called the shoresh, and the children come from that parent. So there is such an idea that the same way that physical disease, mental health, all kinds of things can be passed along genetically, there's a spiritual possibility for the same thing. Good news is you can change yourself. So the father can change himself and the child can change themselves. But in this case, he says, Rashi's telling us, says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, if parents are balei machlokas, if parents are the sort of people who are always making fights, so that is a rotten root. The children will be that way too. Just like them, and even more, because they just continue to grow and expand. Therefore, it's best for them and for the world that they should die as infants. Because then they die holy and righteous and pure, instead of being the most destructive disease to come to the world, because there's nothing worse than machlokas, like in the language of the Pele Yoetz. There's beautiful language in the Pele Yoetz. What does he say? Let's see if I can pull this up, because I know Pele Yoetz. This is powerful. Yadua kama sanui ha-machloket. He says, if you study Torah, you'll know how much God hates machlokas. Ulefi chomer shebo kama tzarech ha'adam lehischazek berov oz v'tatzumot. He says lehitrachek. He says, when you understand how bad it is to be engaged in fighting machlokas, so you'll understand how badly you have to stay away and run from it, like a person running from death. So if you're running from, like, literally death was chasing you with the whole you know, all of his implements and everything, you would run. You would run. So that's how a person is supposed to run from machlokas. Okay, I don't know if we still have a full understanding yet, but he says therefore, machlokas is something that can be passed down almost genetically, and for that reason, these children died. It affects our children. It affects endlessly. There's a story here um, from the Chafetz Chaim. This is a real story that happened in the Chafetz Chaim. Um, After the Russian Revolution, the year is Taf Reish Samech Ches. So this is uh, almost uh, almost 120 years ago. So in the city of Radin, a group of people that decided they were not happy with the Chever Kadisha. Chever Kadisha was run by the same people. They're charging certain fees. They're giving certain plots of land to the people who they like. Whatever. I don't know what their real concerns were, but that's who was unhappy with something. So they were unhappy with the Chever Kadisha. They decided to make a competing Chever Kadisha. We can also buy a plot of land and charge burial fees. And okay. And it was about to turn into a huge machlokas. They had their meetings. They're about to start this. The Chafetz Chaim got up to speak on Shabbos. And he said, my precious brothers, he says, if you would give me 2,000 rubles to give a speech, he says, I wouldn't do it. It requires preparation. He says, my life is almost over. And every hour of my life is precious to me. And therefore, I don't sell my time anymore. And I don't go around speaking. And I don't, he says, like, enough. But he says, I have to say something now because I've been living here in Rodden more than 50 years. I know everybody who lived here. Everybody has died. He says, there's not one person who lives here, no matter how long they live, that they haven't died. And he says, when I die, it's going to happen soon. It's going to happen eventually, but I'm going to have to give a din v'cheshbon on what I did in this world. I'm going to have to answer to God for how I lived my life. He says, and I'm really not sure how I'm going to be able to do it. It's very difficult to know that you lived a good life. He says, but the machlokes, when you have machlokes is the worst thing. He says, it is no matter how many mitzvos a person does. If they create machlokes, it's like throwing money into a tzror nakuv. You're just throwing it into a pail with a hole in the bottom. All your mitzvot are just going in and coming out the other end. Machlokas is the worst thing. He says, now, if I was here, he says, I'm asking you one favor. You guys want to start a thing and you want to make a machlokas. I want everyone in this room to promise me that when you go to heaven, you won't say, well, God, was a Jew named the Yisrael Meir who lived in our town, and he didn't stop us. He didn't say anything. He says, so I'm asking you, when you go there, don't use my name as an excuse. And he burst out in tears, and his whole body was shaking because he kol gufo hachel lirod mipachad. He was petrified. He said, I'm going to have to stand before God and explain how in my community a machlokas happened. He said, I don't think I'll survive. I think that, so please save my soul. And he said, in that shul, at that moment, they agreed they're not starting a new Chever Kadisha. And the people from the old Chever Kadisha agreed to give 3 years off on any fees. For the next 3 years, it's all free. It's just, you can bury your dead for free. It's for a mitzvah. We'll raise the money somewhere else. That was a story that happened with the Chafetz Chaim and Machlokas. There's a letter that they call the Rambam's last will and testament. And many, many people quote this from the Rambam. I read it. It didn't sound to me like the Rambam. It didn't. It's beautiful, though. The second half of it is really like, it's clearly not the Rambam, the second half. The first half, the most part of it with the language, and it's so beautiful that I started to sleuth around. So Professor Sheilat, Rabbi Sheilat, Rosh Hashiva Sheilat, he's a big Talmud Chacham. Rav Sheilat is one of the experts in the Rambam. He tracked it down. He figured out, whatever. It's definitely not from the Rambam, but the first part, the part that I loved so much, is from an Italian unknown Rishon, someone in the time of the Rishon. I'm writing to his children, someone from Italy who wrote very beautifully about machlokas. And then the second half, we don't know where it's from, but it's clearly a forgery from later. It has all kinds of mistakes. They didn't catch things. The person thought the Rambam was living in Spain. I mean, they messed up a little bit. So what do I have here? So I want to read you some of what it says. It's very, very beautiful. Ro'isi levanim hishchiru. Man begins. He's writing to his son. It's clearly a last will and testament. He says, I have seen people that were clean, right? Were like free of sin. Levanim, like the psukim say, right? If your sins are like scarlet, keshelag yalbinu. So he says, I've seen The white get dark. Pachot, pachos, right, is a pechasecha, right? A pachas is a prince in Tanakh in multiple places, right? You have it in Queen in the book of Esther. Achashtar pnima v'hapachos nifchatu. I found pachot, princes who have been diminished. Mishpachot nispachu. So, mishpacha, mispacha, right? I've seen families ruined. Sarim, yeah, these are elevated princes that were taken down from their gedula. The ayoros gedolos nisar aru. Great cities were in shambles. Kibbutzim, gatherings, right? Kibbutzes, nifradu, that were pulled apart. Yechidim nifsadu, individuals were ruined. Anshe emuna avdu, loyal people were destroyed. Nichbadim nikalu, respected people became totally unrespected. Vinit bazu and besibas machlokas. It all came from machlokas. He says, Neviim nibu, prophets have prophesied. V'chachamim chakamu, wise men have spoken wisely. V'filosophim chipsu, and philosophers investigated. Vayosifu l'saper ra'ata machloket, and went on and on. They've all spoken about how bad machlokas, fighting, division, in is. V'lo higiu l'tachlisa, and none of them have finished the job. None of them have actually explained it fully. As much as anybody could write about this, they can't explain. So this man tells his son, hate machlokas, run away from it. Stay away from all the brothers of machlokas, stay away from it. V'gam el kol she'er b'sarchem ohev medonim. People that hate fight, that love fighting, is people that live for this. They love to create drama and they like fights and they stay away from them. Hisnakru v'rachaku kirvasam, because you can get caught up in this. Pentisru b'chol chatosam, you can get caught up in their sins. Hisparu b'sevel, you should be proud of tolerance. Sevel. Kihu gvura hayishara. That's the true strength. True strength is sevel. Yeah, to be sovel. The hanitzachon ha'amiti. That's really winning the fight. Ki bevakashchem hanakama, a person who seeks revenge. Shemalot tasigua, maybe they won't get it. And then they get sick to their heart because they're yearning to just get back at this person. Plus, sometimes you get busted trying to get back at someone and you look foolish and you get right. Right? Like you try to roll the rock on the other person and it rolls back down because you didn't get all the way up the hill, like Sisyphus or something. And if you do get it, then you've sinned before God. You should know that here's what happens when a person has hatred and they wind up with a heart filled with nokin. Bilbul hasech, their mind starts to be unclear. Tirud shena, they don't sleep well. Bilbul paula, they're ineffective at their jobs, at the things they try to do. Golui mumim, their weaknesses get revealed. The gamkain, yivalduhu shone ponim v'halachashim. So, you'll have people that don't really love you. They're faking it. They're whispering behind your back. It sounds like avdan hanefesh kina ochelas. It destroys a person's soul when they become involved in machlokas, and they get consumed by jealousy. And he goes on and on. It's a little more. And they always regret it in the end. Takiru milas hasevel. Appreciate that this is what you have to do. This is what you have to do. This is what you should be doing in your family, right? You've got that uncle, that brother-in-law, like everybody has someone, right? Some people that you just have to put up with. You just have to, and you have to know that machlokas is the worst possible thing. Hisam kedoshim be'enei oivechem. Your enemies should see you as ultimately holy. V'hiskadishtem. And listen, he says if they're anshe levav, if they're sincere people, right, then eventually they'll make up with you because they'll see that you're really a good person. V'manche belial, and if they're people that are just wicked, he says it'll hurt them even more. That you won't get down in the mud with them. You just won't be taken down by them. It drives them crazy. And you will rule over them with the crown of musar. Which is also, it doesn't sound like they're not musar. Like I don't know if he would use the word that way. Anyway, very beautiful language. It goes on even about some other things about anava, but Um, what else do I have to show you? I mean, there's a couple more things on this subject. One of them is that we talked about the family, right? So there's a Rambam. These little children would have been part of that family, and that can't be. The Rambam says that kol mishpachos becheskas kashrus. When you want to go and marry your child off to someone else, so how do you know that the person that you're marrying into is a kosher Jewish family? Maybe they're mamzerim or some other group that you're not allowed to marry in. So halacha is kol mishpachot becheskas kashrus. Any Jewish family can be assumed to be kosher. Umuter lisa mehen lechatchila. And you're allowed to marry one of their children, right? You don't have to worry about it. Aval pikein. If you see two families, shemitgarot zu bezu tamid, you see two families that always fight with each other, right? Or ra'isa mishpacha shibalas matzah miva tamid, or you see one family that fights with everybody else. So, ra'isa ish, or you see just an individual. The rest of his family seems to be behaving nicely. Shahu marbe meriva imakol, that he starts fights with everyone. Ve'az panim biyoter, and he's very chutzpahdik, he's very rough around the edges, such a person. Chosheshin lahem. You should not marry them. Ro'ui lihisrachim, you should stay away from them. These are simanei paslut. These are signs of not being, so in other words, these are things that run in the family. So if in this family you see this, stay away from the people in that family. Additionally, kol ha-poselat acherim tamid, a person who is constantly saying that other people are pasul. For example, he always says about other people that they're bastards. So the halacha is choshishin lo shema mamzerhu. You have to assume that he's a bastard. You have to assume that's the guy, right? You tell him, I know you are, but what am I? Says the Rambam. Right? It's really something, right? If he calls everyone avadim, you have to assume he's maybe an eved. Shakol ha-posel b'mumo posel. Kol ha-posel b'mumo, right? And it's halacha. So in other words, it's part of the family. And then he goes on and describes how Jewish people have certain midot. And if a person doesn't have those midot, then you should assume that they're not from the Jewish people. If the person is cruel and doesn't do chesed, then you should assume that they're not Jewish. And better not to marry into that family. If you did, we might not force you to get divorced. But you should stay away from them, because these things affect the family. They pass along. These are very fundamental spiritual thing. Avoid mochlokes at all costs. I remember there's a story in my family with Grandpa Guterman. This is my mother's grandfather, who was a big tzaddik. He was a rav in Scranton, Pennsylvania, for 60 years. And you don't make it 60 years without having a few bumps along the road, the rabbinate. And there was one time that they had a parsonage, like they had a house that was his house. But it was like the Shalom that eventually became his or something as part of the. And there was like a time when there was some sort of argument about the house, and there was like some board meeting that was like, and it was tearing the community in half, and he came running into this meeting unannounced and just came in and said, please just take the house. Like, my family and I are happy to move. Just promise me that nobody will fight anymore. And everybody there was like so stunned. Nobody could really answer him. And they all sort of said at once, like, no, Rabbi, it's a misunderstanding. Of course, we're not going to take away your house. Like, that's really how they reacted in the end. Similar to that story with the Chavetz Chaim, that there's just nothing that's worth machlokas. Chaim Palagi has an interesting. He was in Izmir, Turkey, 1780 to 1860. So he says, "Ani hagever ra'asa einai." Ani hagever ra'oni. So he says, my eyes have seen since miyom sha'amdi al daiti, from the day that I began to understand the world. Ki kol ish ve'isha, any man or woman, mishpacha or mishpacha, family, medina or medina, right? Province and city where there is machlokes, they never came out clean. Both parties that engaged willingly in machloket, in fighting, in bein begufan, bein b'mamonam, they were either physically severely punished or punished financially, Rahman al-Islam. If a person has a level head, says Chaim Pelagi, ya'amik me'od b'zeh, he'll always be willing to give in and not get mixed into machlokes, because he will lose the machlokes. It's the worst possible thing. And then he tells a story. He has a story where he says, this is in the Kaf HaChaim of Reb Chaim Palaji, Siman Chav Zayin Os Lamed Hey. Pam Achas. It happened once on Lel Shabbos in the year Tov Kuf Ayin Hey. 210 years ago in Turkey. It was Friday night. Shamati de Hashachen. Reb Chaim Palaji is sitting in his house and he hears the neighbor fighting with his wife after Kiddush about the food. Al Dvar Ma'achal. So the neighbor and his wife are fighting. He said he jumped up from his table. He ran and he just sat down at the neighbor's table. He said, hey. And when they saw him, Nivhalu, Nechbazu, V'asu Shalom Benem. They suddenly started behaving. Uvechol Pam Shahaya Ra Osi. He said for the rest of his life, every time the man would see him, he would say thank you. He said it was such a wake-up call for them. La'ot ulazikaron. He says from then on, he and his wife never fought, right? For many years. And Rechaim Palash says, I'm writing this in my sefer. Mimeni Yuru v'chein yasu. He says, I want other people to learn from me. Everybody with their neighbor. Yeah? If you hear your neighbor fighting, go running into the house. That's it. In Israel, for a short time, there was some funny family living next door to us. Do you remember this? I used to go turn off their electricity. No, it wasn't Friday night. When I would hear screaming, I would just turn off the electricity. And then what happened? And they had to come out and find the panel and turn it back on. What happened? That was my method of dealing with it. Right? I think that was creative. I didn't know them. It wasn't like Izmir, where these were like some interesting Israelis, and like we would say hello in the hallway, but I couldn't tell you their names. Yeah, that was my method of dealing with it.
Was this after you read Reply?
I don't remember because I saw this again today. And I even remember ever having seen it, But on the other hand, I'm very I went through this period where I was reading a lot of Rechaim Balaji. If I would have seen it, I probably would have walked into the house and said, no, because I really try to listen to what he says. But we'll see. We'll try to find an opportunity to go. Yeah, we had paper thin walls. I don't know how he heard, how they lived. Oh, no, it's next to ours. They're right in the hallway. It was next to ours. We share a wall, and I knew how mine would sometimes go off, so I knew how to turn off someone else's. And I hear them cursing, what is the electricity in this building? The Israeli government can't get anything right. Our tax dollars. This whole tirade. And then, I don't know if they ever put two and two together. Whenever they screamed over a certain decibel level, the power went off. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Okay, so what's the upshot of all of this? One more thing, to finish with, which is really maybe this could be a big insight for us into how to avoid these things. So, and I'm talking, mochlokes on a real macro level. Meaning not just bickering in the family, but things that tear apart full communities, and people get caught up. My Rebbe, your Rebbe, my yeshiva, your, this is a very significant thing. There's a story in our parsha that one person, On Ben Peles, was saved. His wife saved him. How did she do this? So On Ben Peles, Ishto Hitzilasa. Yeah, she did an amazing thing. First, she tells her husband, she has to convince her husband to get out of the KORACH group. So she goes to him and she says, I understand. What's your horse in the race? What do you care? If Moshe wins, Moshe's the leader and you're his student. And if KORACH's the leader, he's the leader and you're his student. Either way, it's not you. So my nafka loch mino. So what do you get out of this? Now, I understand. Can you imagine saying that to Moshe Emes V'Sorasa? Is Moshe right or wrong? The answer is, well, what do you care? Right? What do you mean, what do I care? This is the only thing that matters. What else matters, right? Go to a chassid. If you're a rebbe, this. So I think the answer is this. I want to answer based on something historical here that I have. I have here a picture of the book, because when I was looking for the book, I'm a little bit messy, but I once saved this because I love this. So this is a story that happened in the 1800s. When he first set out in his role as Hasidic master, Reb Davidul of Tolna instituted an innovation in the recitation of Sabbath and holiday prayer in the Kedushas Keser. So if you daven Nusach Svard, Shabbos, right? Or the Svardi, but if you know, they daven nusach Svard, and so they would say Keter Yitnu Lecha at Musaf, Keser Yitnu Lecha. Instead of saying Kakatuv Al Yad Neviyecha, the Karazel Zeva Amar, which is what the Ashkenazim would say, and right, also all Misnagdim and Chabad still say Kakosov. He asked that his followers say Kadavar Ha'amor Al Yad Neviyecha, following Svard and the Sachari, except for Chabad. In addition, he insisted that his followers pause after the words Lecha Yishaleshu and then recite the word Kadavar out loud in unison to highlight that they say Kadavar, not Kakosov. His opponents, who were the Tzaddikim of Linitz and Savran, refrained from doing this. They asked the Hasidim to pause after V'kara Ze'el Zeva Omar, and only then to say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. There's no pausing to highlight Kadavar. So they would say Kakosov. This seemingly slight innovation, after all, with the exception of Chabad, every Hasidic group already said Kadavar, and all, including the Talmud Hasidim, paused before reciting Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. This became a test of loyalty to a particular tzaddik. The Talmud Hasidim believed that their tzaddik's pronouncement came after he experienced a spiritual ascent, when he heard the angels saying Kedusha before God, and they said Kadavar, not Kakosov. End of story. Other Hasidim didn't find this mystical claim convincing. And the Kadavar directive, in particular, so this all sounds pretty nothing, right? The pause aroused grudges and uproar throughout the provinces of Kiev, Volhynia, and Podolia. Kadavarniks was one group. That was the appellation bestowed on Talmud Hasidim. Their opponents were Kakosovniks or Kadishniks. Bans were pronounced on the non-compliant. Weddings were canceled. Partnerships were dissolved, and families were torn apart. The situation descended to mutual denunciations and violence. The terrible discord between those who say Kadavar and those who say Kadosh, this is now a direct quote from somebody living at the time, will not quickly be forgotten among the Jews. And if it's forgotten, come to the Monday night shir. We'll keep it alive. No, I mean, we don't keep it alive, but we don't forget. How much blood was shed in its course? How many Jewish homes were destroyed to the foundation? Several families were impoverished and condemned to oblivion. Tender young wives were divorced by their husbands because they came from Kadavar families who belonged to the Kaddish faction. They divorced them. And there are still some denunciations in the courts of the royal capitals. It describes here now, Tzvi Kastai, right, writes, engraved in my heart more than anything else is the memory of the flogging that the rabbi of our town, Rabbi Akiva Chayes, received at the hands of the non-Jew, the Pristav, the Gentile chief of police. That's what that means. Because of the Kadavar faith. Our rabbi, a follower of Rav Davidel, was naturally zealous for Kadavar and outlawed the Shechita of the ritual slaughterer, who was a follower of Gedalia Aaron and adamant opponent of Kadavar. Obviously, his Shechita is not kosher. And the Pristav, also an opponent of Kadavar, the Goyish guy, is on the side too. Asked the rabbi to nullify the ban he placed on the slaughter of Shechita. And when the rabbi did not accede to his request, this inflamed his anger. And he raised his whip against the rabbi, and the poor rabbi accepted his verdict. And from that time forth, all the Talmud Hasidim knew that a holy rabbi walked in their midst. Even the young children, the man was a pure saint, a wondrous legend. You ever heard of such a thing? Bonkers. But that's what it is. So someone asked me recently, they said to me, in some societies, in sometimes in Israel, you have like this group and that group, this yeshiva, that yeshiva, and they're not right. Like you have these things, the Sainim, the Mechablim, these different crazy. Why don't we have it as much in America? They asked me, and I said because we have the Yankees and the Mets. I really think that our teenagers are ready. We have something else to be. It's pretty stupid. We won. You didn't win. Those lovely Latin gentlemen won, right? And Kershaw sort of, right? He's always injured, but those guys won. Kike, yeah, he won. So he's spelled kike, so it's basically like we won. We didn't win. You understand? Like his name is Kike, and they allow it. Can you imagine? Yeah, he put a thing over it, right? Yeah, put that over a G in a different word and say, no, it's a different word. Yeah. What do you mean? No, it rhymes with Nigel. It's different. Yeah, sure. That's going to work. So it's very deep. It's very deep. Your allegiance should be you as a human being attaching to them. You don't give up your whole identity. My identity is not the group, is not the herd. My identity is not Kadavar, and my identity is not Kakosov or Kaddish. That's not my identity. My identity is me. She said to him, listen, you need to think for yourself for a minute. Stop the group think. Stop getting caught up with, I'm one of them. What do you actually think here? And if the answer is you don't know, the answer is you don't know. But like, it's not you who's winning. It's Korach or Moshe. So of course it matters who wins. Yeah. Then the people came to get on Ben Pelas. So now he has a problem because he'd already agreed, and they're a band of pretty solid people. So his wife says, listen, these are all very, very holy people. Kol Eda Kulam Kedoshim. They're all very holy. So she uncovers her hair, right, and stands by the front door. And the people come to get him, and they immediately turn around. They can't talk to him with their hair uncovered, and they went off instead to do one of the most serious crimes in all of world history, right? So it just goes to tell you, it's a very, very ironic Gemara that there are people in the world who are more careful about talking to a woman whether her hair's covered or not than they are about keeping the Torah and the mitzvahs and believing in the principles of Judaism, right? So therefore, the conclusion, of course, is not that a person shouldn't be meticulous in halacha, but the conclusion is that you can only laugh at the people in history who are convinced that they are so holy and so righteous, and they wouldn't do it right, and they're just losing their portion in the world to come with every choice that they make, because they've picked the wrong side. But that's their side. That's their Rebbe. That's their Rosh Hashiva. That's whatever it is. I'm me. You understand? I'm me. Don't allow our identity to be taken over by anything but I am me, and my job is to serve Hashem, and who am I? And then I find I connect to this. And if you really need to do this, and so find a sports team to just be crazy about, and like somehow feel like you won when you're sitting at home, and the whole thing makes no sense because it's not you. Because if they have a new owner and they change their name and they trade all of the players for different players, you're still rooting for the team, and they change their like. So what is it already? What are you rooting for exactly? And the answer is it's nonsense. But human beings sometimes have that desire to connect, and don't let it take you the wrong way, because that's the root. The root of communal mochlokes is when people get so lost in what their own personal identity is, that they forget this lesson. We get, it's an unbelievable story. So I think that's something we can learn from the wife of Ben Pelas. She turns to her husband, she turns to all of us throughout the rest of history and says, wait a minute, I mean, who are you? Who are you? Forget what team are you part of? You understand? People love this. I mean, you come into any group and you get the Fleischiks versus the Milchiks in 5 minutes. Ashkenazim, Sfardim, right? This, that, and within the Sfardim, but are you Bukharian? Are you? What's the lowest one on the Persian? But if you're Persian and you won you're a billionaire, then you're Assyrian, and you're right, and you're right. Is that? I think the right Germasian's ready, but that's a Assyrian, even though he's right. And so the whole thing is nonsense. We're all part of these artificial groups that are there to separate us, and they're there to create that this is my identity. You're a person, and when we have that, there's really the machlokas that exists. We should run away from it like fire. We should stay away from it. It's the greatest possible thing. The Gemara says that the love and ve'enam ovim, the people that get insulted and they don't respond, shomin chepasan ve'enam eshivin, they get insulted. And this is in our own personal lives also, by family, by friends, by the workplace. A person who's able to just not get caught up in these things. Their reward in this world and the next world is endless. As the Psalms say, if you're walking down the street, right, and somebody would be throwing diamonds at you, and you first, you don't know they're diamonds. You reach up and you're bleeding, right? You look down and you have your jeweler's loop with you, right? You just came from the Hilchas Nida course, so you have your jeweler's loop. You say, you know what, this is a real diamond. So you hope they'll throw another one and another one, and you live off of that money. It's $50,000 each. He says Rav Victor Miller. It's really brought from earlier Sorim, but the way he said it, the language he said, is that if you would know how much spiritual reward there is from avoiding machlokas, and from just, if it's your spouse, if it's your friend, just holding your tongue, just try. It's so difficult, but just to do that, so you would walk the streets, you would wake up in the morning just waiting for somebody to insult you, and you wouldn't be able to wait for the next time that maybe somebody will call you a filthy Jew or something wonderful like that, because the spiritual benefit of not responding is so tremendous and so great, So thank you, everyone.
Chronologically, the Meraglim is like the next thing that happened, even though it was last week's parsha, right? Meraglim, they sent